Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, another recap episode, episodes 1201 through 24. First, thanks sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, Topps, Upper Deck, and Panini. So starting off with 1201, what I called Founder's Half-Life with Brian Gray. Brian has recently sold Leaf, and he was the founder and the guiding light. Anybody that's a founder understands that when you leave, when you sell your company, others will be in charge. We were just looking at how long does it take for the founder's influence to dissipate over time. And the nuclear example of a radioactive half-life is I think there is some gradual dissipation of my influence, Brian's influence, and anybody else that's been a founder. When you're gone, even when you're across town, as Brian is and I am, you're still no longer the boss. And sometimes the new regime just wants to do what they want to do, and they paid for the right to do that. 1202, another one with Brian. I've been waiting for quite a while to get Brian on, and finally we worked it out. Not his fault, mine. I should have pursued a little more, but I see Brian at the shows, and he's still very active. But anyway, 1202 was the small nuggets hidden in plain sight. Basically, we're both talking about not necessarily what's next, but what are other people not seeing that we're seeing. And he's jumping in a little bit to vintage non-sports, which I know from my experience that was looked down on. Yet the cards are beautiful. The subjects are interesting. And he may be onto something. I was contrasting that or comparing that to looking in these bargain boxes in a dollar box. And there can be non-sport stuff in there as well. And just having a broad eye, the way I do it, actually, I think I have a very broad definition of what a nugget is. If you're looking only for the absolute purest gold, the guaranteed winners, perhaps, some of which are in the dollar boxes, you're going to go a long time between pulling cards, and yet you'll only put really good ones. So I don't really do that. I figure if I'm going to be there for an hour, I want to pull 100 cards, and I want to make $100. I want to make $1 profit. I want to buy a card. I want to double my money at least. That's different than walking around the show for an hour and buying $100 card. It's more fun for me to sit in a chair, visit with friends, overhear, listen, observe, check out the cards, and have a stack of cards that I can enjoy and deal with, take them home and figure it out. 1203 and 1204 I didn't want to put it in one episode because they got longer, but Brian and I had some very definite opinions about restoration, what to do about it. I think when you think about back 100 years ago when alcohol was a problem and they decided to have prohibition. That really didn't work, and neither does prohibiting restoration and alteration. What the government wound up doing is regulating it, taxing it perhaps, but that wouldn't be the same. For restoration, Brian is saying, hey, let's get them graded, but let them get graded with a scale that indicates that they were restored or altered, but they could still have a certain level of eye appeal. And I agree, all altered cards, they may have been created equal, but they're not equal anymore. And some indication of what the gradations of that might be helpful, because I think they're here to stay. In fact, there may even be more altered cards and restored cards in the future. And in fact, I really think that's what's going to happen. So if you don't like it, it's happening. 1205 and 1206 were both box battles. One was Upper Deck, the other was Panini. And I usually try to bring in some other insight besides just opening the box and, hey, here it is, and look at this, especially when I'm doing it audio. In most cases, I have done some on YouTube, but podcast is my primary. So basically with the Upper Deck hockey, just battling with boxes, even when product, and this people have a hard time with this sometimes, but the sports card insight is that even if you have the same supply, there's just as many cards of one brand as opposed to another. Demand really is a powerful influence there. Same supply, the greater demand will win out. And that's what's happened with the Young Guns. So with the flagship Upper Deck hockey that has Young Guns in it, even though there's a lot of Young Guns, they're not scarce. If you buy enough boxes, you will get them. But the demand is so great based on historical continuity. And again, spoiler alert, I did get a Connor Bedard in the box. So that was very nice. And it's off to being graded because you can't afford almost not to grade it. You've got to just keep it, sleeve it immediately, top load it, card saver, whatever. The 1206, that Panini box battle was a bunch of different sports. And I didn't get out my pencil that much other than pointing out that when you're comparing the same brand in different sports, it makes some of the sports, racing in particular, look like a better deal. You're going to pay less for the box, or you're going to get more attribute cards, more better cards when you're in certain sports. And it has to do with the licensing arrangements and the cooperation, perhaps, of the drivers as opposed to the basketball players, as opposed to the football players. All those things factor in. So that was fun just to look at the different sports that Panini is tackling at this point. 1207 and 1208 were both about Mount Rushmore. There'd been some discussion about that. I've been asked to be on some shows, and they'll ask me about that. And I broke it into two parts, of those who are passed away and those who are alive. And of the people that are passed away, there's some very worthy people. And I'm including Mickey Mantle. That was my controversial one. I'm including Mickey Mantle. If you want somebody to visit the Mount Rushmore, put Mickey Mantle in it. When you think about what made the modern hobby here of those who went before us, Mickey Mantle was the enduring superstar since he came up in the early 50s, and was almost always the most valuable card in the set for a long time, and still for many cases, even with the rookie craze. 1208, the hobby of Mount Rushmore for the future. Many of you maybe didn't listen to the very end, but even after the music, I thought, oh my goodness, I forgot Tim Getch, who again is not done, but what he's done already is worthy of consideration through ComC making that happen and having the vision and the execution to be able to, and to build the company. I can really appreciate that. And again, the hobby Mount Rushmore for the future are some guys, not all of whom are 100% positive. I did get some criticism that I had some people there who did some great things, but also did either a bad thing or something that wasn't wise. But on the totality of their work, especially on the good side, they made contributions to our industry. 1209 was the experiencing 10X with Rich. This was just Rich Klein and myself just rambling. We're both kind of ideators, so we didn't have to come to any great conclusions other than, what about this? What about that? How could fanatics, or really the whole industry, how could we promote an atmosphere of the 10X aspect? 1210 was 50th birthday with Rich Klein. That wasn't just a random birthday, because I've had many now, but the aspect of looking back at that being one of the pivot points, not the only pivot point, but a pivot point in our company, and how just time stood still for various reasons, not all of which are in the podcast, but it was Rich wanted to talk about that. And I'm very agreeable. Rich always brings something interesting to the episode. Thanks, Rich. 1052 through 1059. That's 8 different videos. I'm doing them in batches of 8 because they take a while, laying out the cards, taking them down off the wall, and going through and reevaluating within that alphabetical framework, from just trying to figure out who has been on the wall, who is on the wall, who will be on the wall, and then showing the various choices for some of the players and some of the cards for the players. That was fun. I'm enjoying doing that. The one that got the most action was the one that included Michael Jordan, because number one, I had the Jordan signature that I'd pulled, that I'd just gotten back from EGS, as well as I had some other very tough Jordans. Any Jordan that's an insert from the late 90s that's more limited case hits, they're great cards. 1211 was the Outtakes from Hobby Hotline. You should just check out the whole episode, and not just by podcast. If you 10 to 11 on Central Time on Saturdays is when it is. 1212, what is a card? The feedback from Mike Steveline's original question. I did that with Rich. Rich was aware of it, but we didn't do a lot of preparation. We just lived it. But then I went back, I found Mike's original note to us, and I thought we didn't really fully address all that. So I just dealt with that and some other feedback that I'd gotten. So thanks, Mike, for suggesting that. Sensory challenges, the feedback on that, I'd done an episode about that a month or two ago. And I've been thinking more about it, and I'm realizing that as my father's passed away, my mother's not doing that great. Do we fear death, or do we fear decline? And unfortunately, both are inevitable. The only way decline would not be inevitable is if you have sudden death. And nobody is, I don't think, looking forward to that. The sensory challenges is that those are some of the ways that our body and our faculties decline over time. And if that happens, there are ways to deal with it, and there's ways to still enjoy the hobby. 1214, Baseball Card Hall of Fame, an annual episode I do with Ray, and I've done with others plus Ray, but Ray is the prime mover on that. And again, you can listen to my picks. And I guess it's more than just my picks. I'm trying to give some feedback or suggestions to Ray about other things not on the ballot or things that are worthy to be on the ballot, but probably not going to be. But in no way am I typical. I'm not his typical voter. But the exciting thing that came out of it is he's thinking about doing a book when all the smoke clears. And I had some suggestions about that because I think that'd be terrific. That'd be a great contribution, even beyond what he's already done. 1215 and 1216 were listener question episodes where they weren't thematically grouped, but I really was getting so far behind. I just had to grab a hunk of them and deal with them. So keep them coming. I really like them, but I just can't. I'm 3 times a week, so I'm getting a little behind. 1217 was the episode on non-response. I tried to break it up into offense and defense. You just have to listen to the episode. But are you seeking feedback? The unfortunate thing in the non-response is that it appears that some companies are avoiding feedback or avoiding the reading or dealing with the feedback. And I think silence is not golden, as I said. And when the companies are taking the offensive, okay, we want to find out what collectors think. They need to find out what collectors think, dealers think, breakers think. You need to know where the person's coming from to reasonably evaluate their feedback. When somebody says, no, I don't want to participate in the survey, that is an answer in and of itself. 1218 was listener questions about grading, alteration, and restoration. I think people like that. That's a topic that's more and more a hot button because people can be very against it, or they just think, hey, what's the big deal? It wouldn't be if Brian Gray and I, when we talked about it, Brian had a reasonable suggestion for the grading companies to have a 2-tiered grading schedule. That's not completely unreasonable, and it would legitimize to a degree the restoration. But it would call it for what it is. 1219 was my dirty jobs. They weren't all dirty, but they sure started out. It seemed like my high school jobs were pretty dirty, and college too. But then I went to grad school and I was sitting behind a desk, and that's not so dirty. So that was good. So it's the first time I've really done that. I hadn't really gone through all the different jobs I had and how each job taught me something, and probably some hobby insights in there as well. Because when I got ready to have a company and hire people, I thought I want to do it in a way that I would like to work for this company. 1220 was outtakes on the TOPS conference from the early May Hobby Hotline episode. There were so many announcements coming out of that. And so we had a lot of questions about that, and we had it all teed up. Again, that's an episode that's probably a little more timely. I'm not sure you're going to want to listen to that next year, but for right now, that's what people were talking about at that time and in that episode, which again, check Hobby Hotline. Just do the real thing. 1221 was dueling questions with Chris Sewell. There were several of those. I actually had to break it up. But when I have a longer interview with somebody, and they're always interesting, but I gear an hour for it. Sometimes it goes over, and I let them know I'm going to edit it. I want to break it up into 15-minute episodes. That's not always possible. And frankly, it's not always possible to make it 2 episodes. But I just thought when I got to, here's another 10 minutes of it, do I want to throw it in the trash, or do I want to give it to you? And I'd rather give it to you and give you a chance to, if you start telling me, hey, you don't like that, I'll do it. But he had some really good questions for me, and I had some interesting questions for him too. So again, too good not to release it. The 1222 was the basketball hypothetical that I concocted, a crazy scenario. And knowing that Cage was an attorney in background, I thought, let's litigate this or mediate this. And so we had some fun, I think, going back and forth. He was in no way prepared for it. I just said, this is my first question. I'm going to hit you with a crazy scenario, react to it, and then tell me if you're for or against it. And then we'll have a little push-pull on that. But it does point out the problem or the potential problems when one company has an awful lot of power, that they have the power to make decisions, and you even have the power to make decisions we might think are bad decisions. And that's really what this was, a situation that could be bent out of shape and not be good for the industry, yet we might not be able to do anything about it. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for supporting the podcast by listening and telling your friends. I will be back in a couple days with another episode.